It is really so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and many new ones too. Welcome and thank you for joining us to meet Rachel Kadish and to talk about her amazing novel, The Weight of Ink. This is a joint program of Addis Israel and Congregation Beth El. I'm Robin Jacobson, the Library Programs Director for Addis Israel and a co-leader with Marge London of Beth El's book group. In ordinary summers, both Addis and Beth El suspend book programs, but this summer seemed to call for something different. More art, more literature, not less. Seeing this big group today and at our other programs makes Marge and me feel we guessed right. Book gatherings are good medicine for a pandemic, even if they can't make it go away. Before we introduce Rachel, a word about coming attractions. Our next Meet the Author Zoom program is after the holidays on Sunday, October 18th at 11 a.m. Author Goldie Goldblum will be talking about her book, On Division. This novel won the top fiction prize this year from the Association of Jewish Libraries. Goldblum is a practicing Hasidic Jew, and On Division is set in a Hasidic community. So it reflects an insider's perspective on the joys and frustrations of Hasidic life. Looking further ahead, on Sunday, December 6th at 11 a.m., we'll be discussing The Convert by celebrated Belgian author Stefan Hertmans. This is a combined memoir and novel based on actual documents about an 11th century convert to Judaism. These events are listed in the chat box, and if you're on our email list, you'll receive information about registering for them and later on some bonus materials. If you're not on our email list and you would like to be, please contact me at librarian@addisisrael.org. That email address is also in the chat box. This morning, the way we'll proceed is that Marge will introduce Rachel. Then Rachel will talk to us about The Weight of Ink, very special for us. And then we'll have a Q&A period in which you can ask Rachel questions. Although most of this program is being recorded, the Q&A part of the program will not be recorded. When we get to Q&A, you can ask a question by raising your hand electronically, not physically. So how do you do that? You click on the button labeled Participants on your screen. You'll see a list of everyone on this call, and at the bottom of the list, you'll see the option to raise hand. Just click on that button to raise your electronic hand. You can also put questions in the chat box, but sometimes it's more interesting to hear questions in different people's voices rather than everything in my voice. Before we switch to Marge, I just want to share with Rachel and all of you a heartwarming detail. To my surprise, many of you not only registered, but took the extra step of emailing me to express just how much you loved The Weight of Ink. Some loved the idea of finding a hidden cache of letters in an old house. Some felt a connection to Esther. Some were captivated by the idea of lives lost to history. And some found it reassuring to read that even a really, really bad plague eventually ends. For so many reasons, Rachel, people are grateful to you for writing The Weight of Ink. Me too. And in the spirit of The Weight of Ink, people on our mailing list may have noticed that my Zoom background is one of the streets from the 17th century London virtual ride that we sent as a bonus a while back. So with that, Marge London will give us a little background on Rachel Kadish.
Okay, it truly is an honor to introduce Rachel Kadish. She is a graduate of Princeton University and earned her master's degree in fiction writing at New York University. The Weight of Ink, her third novel, was awarded a National Jewish Book Award, the Julia Ward Howe Fiction Prize, and the Association of Jewish Libraries Fiction Award. Her work has been read on National Public Radio and has appeared in the New York Times, Salon, Slate, Paris Review, Iowa Review, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. She has also been the Koret Writer in Residence at Stanford University and a Fellow of the National Endowment for the Arts and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Most recently, she is the co-founder of the Stockholm-based initiative, Voices Between, Stories Against Extremism. This important initiative works to promote peace through a global network of authors who use their stories to highlight the impact of intolerance, extremism, and war. Rachel Kadish lives outside Boston and teaches in Lesley University's MFA program in creative writing. We are so pleased to welcome Rachel Kadish this morning, and we're eager to hear from her. So please go ahead, Rachel, when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Robin and Marge. Those are beautiful introductions. And Jim, thank you for keeping us all going with the tech. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
And just, if anything goes wrong with the headset or any of the tech things, just, cut in and let me know. Oh, this is my dog, Henry. He is sleeping off surgery on his leg, so he'll probably be sleeping the whole time, but that's the ball of fluff in the corner is Henry. Actually, his full name is Henry David Thoreau, but he only gets called that when he's in trouble, right? So I just want to start off by saying thank you for being here in this virtual space. And I'm looking at the numbers, and there are almost 200 people on a Sunday morning in late summer. And that it's very moving to me and meaningful to me. This spring, when everything shut down, we all assumed, all my in-person book events were canceled, and we all assumed that everything was just going to be shut down. And then all these virtual events started up, specifically in the arts. I don't know if you know about the Met website, but crashed because thousands and thousands of people were signing on to listen to opera, and which is not usually, the case with opera in this country. And arts venues were being flooded, and it really made me think, what's the role of the arts in a time like this? What's the role of literature in a time like this? Because often artists feel irrelevant, right? But I do think that these are the moments that the arts are for. I found myself, I was signing up to listen to opera, which I don't usually do, and I'm reaching out for music and dance and all these things. I think we're in a few different kinds of crisis right now. We're in medical crisis, economic crisis, also a crisis of human isolation and disorientation. And it's very easy to focus on symptoms rather than people, or politics rather than people. And the pandemic makes people feel vulnerable and small and scared and maybe mistrustful of each other. And we need human presence, human touch. That's what we often don't have to anchor us. But this isn't the first time in history where people have needed to find a way to touch each other when they can't touch. And that's one of the things that the arts are for. It's the arts are human touch distilled into a form that can be sent across borders, can be sent through the airwaves, to remind us that we're human and that the person behind the mask is also human. One of the things fiction does is it unmasks people, sort of metaphorically, but it shows you what's behind, what's inside, and it reminds us that we're not alone, and that's not nothing. And every time I see, these kind of numbers for a program in the arts, when I'm sure people have plenty of other things to do, I'm really very moved and grateful to be able to be part of that. I'll start off just talking a bit about the book, but then the fun part will be the Q&A when we can talk about what's on your minds. But the one question I'll start with, because it's always the question I'm asked, is how did I get to this topic for this novel? There's a Henry James quote I love, which is, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? And I operate that way very much. I often don't know what I think about something until I sit down and start trying to write about it, trying to make up a story about it. And I tend to start writing when something is bugging me. Something's rattling around in my head and I can't quite make my peace with it. And so some years ago, there were two things on my mind like that, and I'll just focus on one of them right now. Maybe we'll have time to get to the other, which is a line in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. And she poses the question, she says, what if William Shakespeare had had an equally talented sister? What would have happened to that woman, a woman with that kind of intelligence and talent? And Woolf answers her own question, and it's very blunt and quite depressing. She says, she died young. She never wrote a word. That would have been the fate of a very talented woman in Shakespeare's era. Now, I can't argue with Virginia Woolf on that. She's obviously right that would have been the most likely outcome for a woman of that era. We know about the restrictions on women's education, the access to education, the access to conversation with other like-minded people, because that's how you sharpen your ideas. We know that about the realities of childbirth, domestic labor. So it could be pretty forbidding and pretty crushing. And yes, it's most likely that a woman with that kind of talent would have died without writing a word, but I couldn't help shadowboxing. I couldn't help sort of saying, well, what would it take for a woman with that kind of mind not to die without writing a word? And especially, what if she were Jewish? What if, this era, it's during the Inquisition, what would it take? Well, for one thing, she would have to be a genius at breaking the rules. So I thought, okay, that's kind of fun. And I decided I wanted to try to write a novel that reached back in time to ask the question, what does it take for a woman not to die without writing a word? What did it take then? And what does it take now for a woman not to be defeated when everything around her is telling her to sit down and mind her manners? So I thought, okay, I need characters that don't mind their manners. That's going to be fun. But I needed a time period. And I needed a time period, I guess I had sort of two criteria. One, it had to feel right. It had to be a time period that I thought, oh yeah, this is fascinating to me. I want to enter into this. And the other thing was I needed a setup where there was kind of a frontier mentality. One of those moments when there just aren't, circumstances are not as usual. The men who would usually fill normal positions aren't there. So that's when they might let a woman do something, for now, till the guys come back, right? Kind of what I think of as the Rosie the Riveter mentality. Okay, you can come into the factories because we need someone here and the men are off to war. So that kind of setup. So I started reading a bunch of different histories, and I stumbled across the Jewish history, the history of the Jewish community of Amsterdam in the 17th century. People sometimes say to me, oh, you must have done, graduate work in history about this time period, and that's why you chose it. That would have made a whole lot of sense, but I sort of did the opposite. I chose a time period I knew nothing about. I didn't know that the Jews of Amsterdam in the 17th century were Sephardic. Not Ashkenazic. I'd assumed they were Ashkenazic. They were, in fact, mostly refugees from the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. I didn't know that Amsterdam, at the time in the 17th century, was really the only safe place to be openly Jewish in Europe. They referred to it as the New Jerusalem. And in Amsterdam, so long as you kept to a few basic rules, Jews were safe. And the rules were things like you weren't allowed to debate religion with non-Jews. You weren't allowed to sound atheist, but nobody was allowed to sound atheist. This is a time period when people were literally ripped limb from limb for being atheists in Europe. I didn't know that Spinoza was from this community. I hadn't even known Spinoza was Jewish. I never took a philosophy course. So I feel like I was the least qualified person to write this novel. I didn't know that the Jews of Amsterdam excommunicated Spinoza. But I became fascinated with his history, and I was reading actually Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein's book, Betraying Spinoza, which is an amazing book. And I was reading about the excommunication of Spinoza, which was kind of interesting because up until that time, excommunication in the Jewish community was not the big scary thing that word, excommunication, makes us think of. It was a slap on the wrist. It was, you're excommunicated for 2 weeks till you say you're sorry, and then we're good, right? That's how excommunication was used up until Spinoza. And when they excommunicated him, it was fire and brimstone stuff. It was a lifetime ban. So I was reading the documents, and the language of the excommunication ban is like, God's fury will smoke against him. Lifetime ban on Spinoza. Lifetime ban on anyone who has any contact with Spinoza. And I was reading it, and something really struck me. Sometimes you read a really old document, and you can feel the human emotions in it. And I was reading it and I thought, my God, these people are terrified. They're basically, because one of the things Spinoza was doing, he was definitely debating religion with non-Jews, and he was sounding frankly atheist. So the whole document reads a little bit like, this guy, he's over there, we're over here, we got nothing to do with him. Because, there were many reasons for the excommunication, but one, according to a lot of historians, I'm not the first person saying this, was that he was rocking the boat, and they had a very precarious sense of safety in Amsterdam. And I was reading this, and the emotions in this language, I could feel their fear. And there was something that was suddenly so familiar. And I thought, I know these people. These people are refugees, and I grew up around refugees. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. My mother was born on the run. And even though it was different centuries, there was something so familiar about this fierce and beautiful desire to rebuild the community in the shadow of calamity and ongoing calamity in the case of the Inquisition, but also this brittleness and the sense of fragility, like if the wrong thing is done here, or if just the wind blows the wrong way, everything could happen all over again. And it was in that sense of determination, but fragility, that I thought, this is the community I have to write about. I felt like I thought I know these people, except I didn't know really any of the things about their lives. And then I had to go do all the research. But then I also read about this moment when Manasseh ben Israel, a rabbi from that Portuguese refugee community in Amsterdam, went to approach Cromwell in England to try to get the Jews officially readmitted to England, even though they were still there. And I thought, that's my frontier. And so I made up this idea of a rabbi, a minor rabbi, it's a fictitious rabbi, from the Amsterdam Portuguese refugee community, who would go with his household to London to help start to re-educate London's Jews. And I thought, okay, the brother's going to be there, but there'll be a reason that he can't scribe for the rabbi, and the rabbi is blind, so he needs a scribe. And that's how this young woman is going to get a chance to be around books and have the time to sit and read and write that a woman wouldn't otherwise have. That's my frontier, my Rosie the Riveter moment. And that'll allow this story to blossom if it can. And then I just started writing. I don't outline in advance, and if anyone's interested, I'm happy to talk about why I don't, and I kind of can't. So everything I do is an improvisation. So I started, I opened a file and I started with, what's the beginning? Let me begin afresh, perhaps this time to tell the truth. For in the biting hush of ink on paper, where truth ought raise its head and speak without fear, I have long lied. And I started and I wrote those couple paragraphs that end with, let these pages compass at last the truth, though none read them. And I started that and I thought, okay, I don't know who this woman is going to be, but she did something that she regrets and she would do it all over again. And she feels she needs to set it down on paper, and she knows the hazard if anyone ever reads what she's writing. And so I wrote that, and then I sort of turned the page, or whatever we do on the computer, insert page break. And I imagined sort of like Judi Dench sitting in her office, and that became Helen in my mind, a woman who's sort of at this still, quiet moment where everything's sort of poised in the balance. And then what's going to happen is, she's going to go to the house, or she's gone to the house and she's seen the documents, and there's going to be a moment where history comes into the present. And, we all have a choice when something historical comes into the present. We all have a choice when we, well, for me, when I was listening to my older relatives speak when I was a kid, whenever we read a book from the past, or we talk to someone who lived through something, before us, we have a choice to either sort of blink and look past it, or to chase after it and say, well, what was that like? What does it mean? And pick it up. But once you pick up a piece of history, right, it's in your hands. It's in your hands. And you have to decide, you have to let yourself be changed by it. You have to let your view on the world be changed by it. And I thought, I've always loved that braided structure where there's the past and the present interwoven. I love the novel Possession, A.S. Byatt. That's the novel. When I read that, I thought I want to do something like that, except with Jewish history. So I think that sort of set me up to want to write this book. But I thought, here's this contemporary character, Helen, and there's going to be something about this history coming into her life that's going to force her to see everything differently. I'm going to stop there because I think that's enough of me just talking. And why don't we go to questions? Are there questions? I haven't been watching the chat.
So thank you, Rachel. That was a very rich and thought-provoking presentation.